to another session on methodology of literature. Today, I shall begin the second module. We shall be doing both the modules, alternatively. So I thought I shall begin the second module as well. So in the second module, in your textbook, it starts with the Russian formalism, textual approaches. That's what I am dealing with. So in the first chapter in the textual approaches, so the second module is the formalist approaches, and that is the Russian formalism. Okay, so let's have a look at what formalism is. So we start criticism, years, all years, okay, stay alert and be all ears. All right, so let's begin. Formalism, according to M.H. Abrams, it's in your textbook. So I want you to open your textbook as well. Turn to page number 33 of your textbook. All right. Okay. Formalism, according to M.H. Abrams, refers to an aesthetic tendency characterized by the separation of form and content, or content, that is the correct pronunciation, content of art and literature, in which the predominant significance is given to formal aspects. Now, what does it mean? What does M.H. Abrams mean by this statement? An aesthetic tendency characterized by the separation of form and content of art and literature, in which the predominant significance is given to the formal aspects. What it means is that according to the formalist approach, formalism refers to the form. It's there in that word itself. Everything is to do with the form. The formalist try to find how a work or literature becomes literary. The word literary. What is literary? Now how in literary canon itself we studied what comes to the literary canon, what gets eliminated. So this also has a lot to do with finding out which text has literary or is of rich in literary value. Now let's move on. Russian formalism. Now this emerged as a school of literary theory within two intellectual circles during 1915-16. Okay, and one was situated in Moscow and another in Petrograd, what is now St. Petersburg in Russia. So the two intellectual circles were one school of thought, one school of formalist thought, which is situated in Moscow, and another in Petrograd. The circle consisted mostly of, this school of thought consisted mostly of linguists. You know who linguists are. Linguists are the ones who study language, okay? They are the ones who scientifically study language, and literary historians, and their main focus was to discuss and debate the essence of literariness of literature. What makes a work of literature or a text of literature literary? Okay, that was their main idea, or their main focus. In other words, what enables us to identify a work as literary? To quote Roman Jakobson, a major formalist, the subject to quote him, the subject of literary scholarship is not literature in its totality, but literariness in that which makes of a given work of literature, unquote. That is, what makes literature is the ലിറ്റററിനെസ് ഓഫ് ലിറ്ററേച്ചർ. ഒരു ലിറ്റററി വർക്കിനെ നല്ലൊരു ലിറ്റററി വർക്ക് അല്ലെങ്കിൽ നല്ലൊരു വർക്ക് ഓഫ് ലിറ്ററേച്ചർ എന്ന് പറയണമെങ്കിൽ അതിൻ്റെ ക്വാളിറ്റി എന്തായിരിക്കണം? വാട്ട് ഈസ് ദ ക്വാളിറ്റി? ഇറ്റ്സ് ലിറ്റററിനെസ്. സോ വാട്ട് makes this literariness? The literariness depends on the language that is used, how the language is structured, what kind of forms you use in the language, how is it different from our everyday language. We speak, we use the same language to write, to speak, to write literature, to write poem, also to make our grocery list. While you go shopping, you make your grocery list. That there also you are using the same language. If you are a speaker, if you speak, if you are an English person, or if you are from England, you will use English as your language. English is your native language. If it is Malayalam, what do we use? We use Malayalam, right? So our grocery list is also written in Malayalam, and when we write a poem, we write a poem in Malayalam. Or perhaps you write a short story, you write a short story in Malayalam, right? So how can you differentiate between your short story written in Malayalam or your beautiful poem written in Malayalam from the grocery list that you made? What is the difference? The difference is the literariness of your short story or your poem. Clear? See, to follow the text blindly would get us nowhere, because there's a lot more to speak about formalism than what is written in your textbook. So we'll have to go in detail to understand what formalism is. Because if you are to just simply read your textbook, you will have absolutely no idea of what formalism is. So just listen carefully. I'll be mostly explaining things outside your textbook to tell you what formalism is, because what is written in your textbook is a mix of all of the things that I'm going to tell you. So if I don't explain things in detail, you will have absolutely no idea of what you are dealing with. And literary, when it comes to criticism, when it comes to theory, it is important that you have to have a base of what you are learning. All right, so I'll be taking things, yes, it is connected with your text, it is connected with from your examination point of view, but if you have to just go by the text, you will understand nothing. That is why. So listen carefully, be alert. All right, okay. I shall be taking few of these lectures that I'm going to tell you are from NAPTEL, IIT Kanpur, and also from Peter Barry as well. Okay, so the Russian formalists, they attempted, now what did they do? They attempted to explore the literary quality of the work of literature. There are three related points they made in this regard. Now, what are the 3 points? So what is literature, or what is the literariness of literature is what the formalists focused on. And for that, they stressed on 3 important points. Let's see what those important points are. The first point is that the source of literariness is neither the author, nor the context, nor the theme, nor the subject. So what's the first point? Literariness of a particular text or a particular work of literature has nothing to do with the author, who he is, whether it is a girl or whether it is a woman or a man, whether it is written in the 17th century or written in the 21st century, whether it is written by a transgender, whether it is of the past writing, whether it it speaks of high, or whether it was written by a particular author who is well known, or whether it is written by a particular author who has absolutely no or he's just an inferior poet or a writer. So it has nothing to do with the author. Whoever he is or whatever he is, it has, his text or his writing has nothing to do with the author. That's the first point. The next one is, it has nothing to do with the context in which he is writing, or it has nothing to do with what he is trying to imply. The another one is the theme, nor the subject of literature has anything, or the subject of what he has written has anything to do with the literariness. If the person has written something about a world war, okay, just imagine. That's a very important, if you have to look at it, it is a very important aspect, right? The world war. So if a person has written a very famous story from or basing it with the world war, and he writes hopelessly, can you call that work literature? No, you can't. So even the context, nor the theme, nor the subject has anything to do with the literariness of the language, or literariness of that work that he has written. Clear? So the first point is that the source of literariness is neither the author, nor the text, nor the theme, nor the subject. Okay? Second one. The second one follows the first one that we discussed right now. That is, the source of literariness of a piece of literature is its language. So what is the source of literariness? So in the first point we discussed that the source of literariness is neither the author, nor the context, nor the subject, nor the theme of what he is writing. Okay, it has nothing to do with any of these things. Then what makes these works of literature become literary? Why is it that we adore the work of Shakespeare? Why is it that we adore the work of John Osborne? Why is it that we adore the work of Camus? All these people, why is it so? That is because of the way they have structured language. Just because you write about a particular theme, just because you are the one who's writing, you are William Shakespeare and you are writing a work, and you have written it in a pretty horrible way, you don't know, you have not structured your language properly, it's a hopeless piece of writing. Can it become a good piece of literature even if you call yourself, or even if you are William Shakespeare? No. So, neither the author, nor the context, nor the theme, nor the subject matters here when it comes to literariness of the language. And what matters? What matters, or what makes literature literary, is its language. Clear? It's the second point. Now let's go to the third point. The third point is that literary language is different from the non-literary use of language. And the difference is caused by how the language is structured in literature and how they follow a set of rules and law. For that, as we move on, this one I shall explain with a broader example. Okay, now let's just take a look at the logic behind the assertion of the formalist. Let us take a look at the logic behind those three important points that the formalists try to tell you, that their assertion. Now, they said that literariness can only emerge from language use, right? So let us take the example to understand what the formalist has to say. Let's take the Romanticist theory. Okay, you know the Romanticists, William Wordsworth, Keats, Shelley and all, and also the modern romantics. Okay, they, according to them, it's all to do with what? The personality of the author. It's a spontaneous overflow of powerful emotions, right? So it's the personality of the author. All right, according to the romantic theorists. I'm not speaking about the formalists. I'm giving you an example. I'm giving you this example to compare what the formalists are trying to tell you. The difference. Okay, so if the romantic theory or the romantics asserts that, or try to locate, if they are to be given, if you are to ask the romantics or William Wordsworth or Keats or the present day romantics what makes a language literary, they would say it is the personality of the author that makes the that makes a literary text or literature or a poem or a prose literary. They would say it is the personality of the author. Then we face a problem, right? That is, we will have difficulty in distinguishing the literary and non-literary creation of the author. That is, for example, what I told you just now. You are going to write a short story. Okay, and you write a short story. Darsiny is a person who writes well. She is a vlogger. She writes well. Yes, so so she is a poet also. Darsiny, can I ask you, if according to romantics, I'm speaking about romantics, if according to them, they say that literariness of the language lies in the personality of the author, how come we can, how then will we distinguish or differentiate between your poetry and your shopping list? Because you are the personality there, you can have both. It is Darsiny who's writing, right? Both the poem as well as the shopping list is written by whom? The same person, the same personality, right? So likewise, again, I just gave an example with Darsiny. I'll give an example with William Wordsworth. William Wordsworth also, if you are to make something very poetical, then how are we to distinguish between his poems and his laundry list or his grocery list? Because after all, both are the products of the same mind and the same personality, right? So the first point, what the formalist asserts is true. It has nothing to do with the personality of the author. Okay, who he is, what he is, from where he is, from which background he is, it has nothing to do with the personality of the author. What he likes, what he does not like, his personality has nothing to do with the author. All right. Then similarly, next we come to the theme, right? Theme or the subject also cannot be the source of literariness of a poem. Thus, it is possible to write a medical thesis on the beating of human heart as to write a poem. It is based on the subject, if it is based on the subject then, right? So if I am to, like for instance, heart, you can write a medical thesis also on, it is a subject, you're writing a particular subject, the subject that is given to you is heart. You write a poem about love, or you write a poem about heart itself. You can write a poem about heart in the sense you can write about love, your heart being taken away by somebody else. You can also write a medical thesis about heart, right? So subject matter also has nothing to do with the literariness. Now, if I am to write a medical thesis and I am to write a poem, how can I say that my medical thesis is also literary? You can't, right? So the subject alone, also next one, the subject, therefore the author and the subject alone cannot help us make or distinguish between literature and non-literature. Again, next one also, the socio-cultural historical context is also ruled out by the formalists from their study of literariness because of the same reason. Okay, even the socio-political, economic, historical conditions cannot make a particular work literary, because the historical milieu might frame the production of various kinds of literary as well as non-literary works. Like for instance, in history you have works on poems, great works of poems. If you are to take the period, Elizabethan period, you have William Shakespeare, you have Edmund Spenser, you also have various writings on discoveries as well as voyages. Okay, and yes, they are considered literary, but they fall under a different genre. They are not the same as the sonnets of William Shakespeare. Okay, they are not like the allegorical poems of Edmund Spenser. Okay, so there is a lot to do with the historical, like for instance, works on history, works on discoveries, works on voyages, they are all different. So what makes them literary? Okay, so the context too cannot therefore determine literariness. So neither the author, nor the subject, nor the theme, nor the historical social context, that is the historical social political context, can make a particular work of literature literary. So what is finally left then constitutes, or that constitutes a poem or a literary work, is the basic or the physical form or words on the page. Yes, so what constitutes finally, what constitutes literariness? It's nothing but the words written on the page, how they are structured in the work, or is all that matters. Again, we face a problem. Language used by a poet to create poetry and used by him or her to speak or to communicate about the mundane works or the ordinary things, like speaking to their relatives, their friends, and so on, is also the same language, right? The poet, that's what we discussed in the beginning also. The same language is used by the poet to write, to speak, especially to speak and to write. At the same time, he uses the same language to speak to his friends or to communicate in the non-literary sense. So how then can we judge the literariness of literature? Here, the formalists will argue that what makes language of his or her poetry literary or different from his or her ordinary speech or ordinary non-literary use of language, that is speaking to their relatives or family, is the special words he or she uses in the language of his or her poetry. Again, I come back to Basneen Huda. Basneen writes poems. Basneen also speaks to her mother, speaks to her friends. So she uses the same language to speak to her friends and also to her mother. Right? Or she uses the same language to speak to the teachers and also to write her poems. Right? So what makes Basneen Huda's poems literary is the use of language in her poem. She writes beautifully. Her words are brilliant, explicitly well written poems. I must say, and I'm very proud to have taught you. So, to be your teacher, that is. Well done to you. This is a public way of congratulating you, because you started writing only now. Yes, you did write earlier, but then you started your vlog only now, right? So congratulations to you. I cannot congratulate you in person, so I congratulate you in this way. Well, it is well written. Anyway, I hope you understood the difference between literary and non-literary use of language. The formalists, they argue that the language, or what makes a poet's language literary, is the special use of words and how he or she has structured the words in his writing or in his or her poem is what makes that work literary. So the primary focus of the Russian formalists boils down to this issue of how language is uniquely structured in literary works, which makes them identifiable as literature. And since the effort of the formalists was to turn literary theory into science of literature, that was their aim also. They wanted to do a scientific study of literature. Till then, that is, till the Victorian, I did tell you about that in the previous videos, till the Romantics and till the Victorian period, we have the liberal humanist theory. It is with the coming of T.S. Eliot and I. Richards that the new criticism actually starts. Now we'll be coming to new criticism, but before that we have to understand that it is formalism that begins first, and soon it spreads to Europe. And how it spreads to Europe is basically because of the Bolshevik Revolution, and how the major writers of this period gets, they are exiled from Russia, and then they move to France, and there it starts spreading, and then you have new criticism. So since the effort of the formalist was to turn literary theory into science of literature, their exploration of structuring of literary language took the form of finding the rules that shaped and controlled the structuring process. So it was all about how language was structured, the rules that were used, the forms that were used to make a language literary. The major formalists were Victor Slowsky, Roman Jakobson, Boris Eichenbaum, Yuri Tininov, Boris Tamarsky, Grigory Gukovsky, Vladimir Krop, he's a folklorist, and Vladimir Mayakovsky. Then you have Mikhail Bakhtin. We shall be dealing in detail with Victor Slowsky and Mikhail Bakhtin, especially defamiliarization, Victor Slowsky's defamiliarization, his fabula and Stussy, and also Mikhail Bakhtin in detail. But before we move on to these theories, let me briefly dwell upon the relation between formalism and contemporary Russian politics. Now, the contemporary politics in the sense, the then contemporary politics. Okay, so now before, soon after the establishment of the two circles, that is the first one in Moscow and the second one in St. Petersburg, the present day St. Petersburg, that is Prague, Moscow and Prague. The first one was founded in 1914 by Roman Jakobson, and the second one that was established in Prague was founded by Victor Slowsky and Yuri Tininov. You have to understand that before these, or after, not before, after the establishment of soon after the establishment of these two circles, it got established and it was going on when suddenly in Russia, Russia underwent a political change. The Bolshevik Revolution in 1917 marked the end of Russian monarchy, and the Russian monarchy was replaced by the communist government. During the next decade, the Russian government came up with theories about how literature, they not just governed the state, but also they governed how literature, art, literature, and every single thing about the state should be governed. So when it came to literature, they decided, or they came up with various theories about how literature should be created and what role it should play within the society. The only officially sanctioned literature was the one supposed to portray the realities of economic class dynamics within the society, the goodness of the proletariat, and of course the good qualities of the communist regime. The rest of it was out of the context. Formalism, you know what formalism is all about. Formalism says nothing to do with the author, nothing to do with the history, nothing to do with the class struggle, nothing to do with the subject or the theme. They completely excluded all these things, and their exclusive focus was on the literariness of the language, and it refused to consider the socio-political context in studying literature. So what happened was it made matters worse for them. It brought them under the enmity of the government. And so the formalists, with this feature, made it particularly unpopular with the communist government of the day, and the formalists and formalism as a school of thought was officially suppressed in 1930. But this work, their works, though it was suppressed, was reborn years later in the Western literary studies. So most of the formalists, they had to leave Russia and they had to take refuge in various other places of Western Europe. And this was how formalism started spreading in the Western world. This was when Todorov, Sevatan Todorov, that is, published in French, that is in Paris, the translation of a selected number of works by the formalists. He translated few of the works of the formalists. So see, here you can see the political events so you understand that, see, there is a lot of things to do with the emergence of a theory. However hard you try to suppress a particular theory or a work, if it is to be born, it will be born somehow or the other. Because the Russian formalism was completely suppressed by the communist government of the day. And that suppression, though they suppressed it, it came out in a different form by some of the disciples of the formalists, or the students of these great formalists, and they translated and they published the work there, and it became a major hit, and thus we have formalism as a part of the Western literary studies. Okay, now let's go back to Boris Eichenbaum and in his essay that gives an overview of the approach of formalists. This already we have covered, and so you won't find it much difficult to understand. Turn to page number 34, my dear students. Come to the last paragraph. Here you have Boris Eichenbaum's overview of formalism. He had written this in his seminal work, The Theory of Formal Method. It's an essay written in 1926. translated by Lemon and Ray. You have the basic or the most important ideas included here. The first one, let's read the first one. The aim is to produce a science of literature that would be both independent and factual, which is sometimes designated by the term poetics. So here you have the first one, their attempt to make literature into a scientific study of language. Literature which was once considered philosophical, which was once considered, not a major part of the study or a discipline of study, is now going to take a different turn, especially criticism, especially the theory. So its basic aim was the science of literature, okay, and to make it more factual. Now look at the second point. Since literature is made of language, we have already discussed this in detail, so we are not going to go deep into it. Since literature is made of language, linguistics will be a foundational element of the science of literature. So, what does it mean? Linguistics will become, it is the scientific, so the most important element in the science of literature is linguistics. The third point, literature is autonomous from external conditions in the sense that literary language is distinct from ordinary use of language, not the least because it is not entirely communicative. So, a different use of language, the difference between literary and non-literary use of the language. Alright, then literature has its own history. It does not require the history as of the material history that we speak of, the socio-economic, political conditions or background of history that we speak of, the material history. No, that is not it. Literature has its own history, a history of innovation in formal structures, the word, how they are formed, the way English has taken its form, the present form. Literature therefore has its own history. So you don't have to, it's not about the external material history that we are speaking about. It is more of the innovations in the formal structures. The third one is what a work of literature says cannot be separated from how the literary work says it, and therefore the form and structure of a work, far from being merely decorative wrapping of an isolable content, is in fact part of the content of the work. It is to be pronounced content, okay, but I keep pronouncing it as content because that's how I have learned. Anyway, okay, the form, it is to speak about, or this is to speak about the form, or this speaks about the form of the work, how language is structured. Literature, and it's all to do with the form and structure of the language and nothing more than that. So this is the overview of what formalism is all about by Boris Eschenbaum. Okay, so now let's move on to the next very important person, Victor Slowski, and defamiliarization. So art in Victor Slowski, in his defamiliarization, which he calls ostranine or estrangement, more literally, is all about how language is structured in literary pieces and how they are given quality of literariness. Now, in his essay, Art as Technique, Slowski observes how in our regular exposure to the world, we grow accustomed and habituated not only to our surrounding materials but also the ideas, concepts, narratives, etc. that we encounter frequently. That is, നമ്മൾ എല്ലാ ദിവസവും കേൾക്കുന്ന ഓരോ കാര്യങ്ങളും അത് we get accustomed to it, we get habituated to it. So even if we, like for instance, if my house is near a hospital, I am accustomed to hearing the ambulance sound, the siren of the ambulance. I get accustomed to it and I get habituated to it, that it I don't sense the casuality or the feeling that a person who lives very far away from a hospital area and perhaps is more sensitive to the siren of the ambulance, he's able to think more about the casualties, or perhaps more about what perhaps would be happening to that particular person. Whereas I, on the other hand, I'm seeing this. I see this every day, the casualties that come to the hospital, the accident cases, the terrible deaths and the siren. I'm accustomed and habituated to it. So I am familiar. I'm like, for instance, I don't sense or I don't become sensitive to it. I hope I'm able to make you understand. See, our perception to these material things and ideas are therefore dulled, okay, to such an extent that we stop mentally processing them at all. We stop thinking about them at all, because we are dulled, or our perception to these material things are dulled because we are accustomed to it, we are habituated to it. Another instance that I can give you is a family that lives near a railway station. Okay, they are living there for many years. The children there are accustomed to the sound of the train, and therefore because they are regularly exposed to it, they are habituated and accustomed to it, and their minds have stopped processing the sound altogether. The sound of the train and the sound, annoying, disturbing sound that the trains make, they have stopped processing this as disturbing or intrusive, lack of privacy, or that as though it is intruding into their lives as such. Their minds stop processing that. Whereas, and when a guest come to their house, they think about how intrusive or how disturbing the sound is only when somebody or some guest come to their house and say complains about it and say, how do you live here with all this terrible noise and all. So the reason is because we get accustomed or we get habituated to a particular thing, that our brain stops thinking about, our mental processing stops, our mind is dulled by it. Okay, so the mental processing stops and we stop thinking about it at all. Alright, so thus Slowsky, what he's trying to say is, he argues that perception, when it becomes habitual, turns into something that is automatic and not thought out. Okay, when it becomes a habit, especially perception, when you perceive things, when you are thinking your thoughts, when it becomes habituated, or when it becomes when it becomes habitual, it turns into something that is very automatic. Okay, and it's not a thought at all. Okay, it's not anything that is thought of. Now this process of perception has a profound effect on language also. The same idea can be used in language also in our daily life. This language too echoes the deadening of our perception in our familiar settings, and thus we use expressions and phrases that are usually half-formed or incomplete. Okay, so the daily language is the language that we use. How do you say good night nowadays? Many spellings, right? Especially in WhatsApp and all. When you say good night, it is either G-N-I-T-E-G, G, and then you have an 8. Yes, so many structures. So what happens there is the language, this language, it has already deadened our perception, and therefore that is why we use it in a half or dulled, a half formed or incomplete process. Now Slowinski, what he says, now he uses from language, he uses it in literature. He argues that in literature it is unique, or literature is unique, and it is different from a mundane or ordinary language or of communication, because it structures language not in a way that deadens our perception, but rather it awakens our perception. So literature, how the language in literature has to be structured is how it can awaken our perception and not deaden it. So he says the language therefore used in literature is a defamiliarized way. We have, that is, it is defamiliarized, that it defamiliarizes for us ideas and things that we are accustomed to, that we have left completely perceiving them. For instance, again, to speak about an example, നമ്മളെപ്പോഴും habituated ആയിട്ടുള്ളതും അല്ലെങ്കിൽ perceive ചെയ്ത് we have become, the language has been so frequently used that we have stopped perceiving it completely. And in literature, all these languages become alive because they are used in a way that is totally different from the way we use it in our communication, on our day-to-day communication. How these communication or these languages are used by us and how they have deadened our perception. These deadened perceptions are made alive by literature, because the very same words and sentences are used in literature not in the usual accustomed habitual manner, but in a defamiliarized form. Not a familiar manner, but a defamiliarized form. That is, the language of literature returns us back to a state of innocence where we perceive what we already know as if we are perceiving them for the first time. It does so by making strange what is already familiar to us, and so that we cannot recognize it easily. For example, I'll just give you a small example. For instance, I am to say, you look very bright and beautiful. You look very bright and beautiful. These are words that we use every day. When a person comes who he's or she is good looking or is happy and he is very energetic, he or she is very energetic, he's very happy, or she's very happy about something, she's well dressed, good looking, everything, okay, not just good looking, everywhere, in all sense, they are like very happy. You say, you look very bright and sunny today. Okay? Now look how Shakespeare uses those words in sonnet. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? When he uses that, don't you think the same words or the same meaning is given in a different way. Shall I compare you or compare thee to a summer's day is a defamiliarized form of the familiarized form. You look very bright and beautiful, or you look very bright and sunny today. The same words, the same implication or the same meaning, or of course here he is using it to speak about his friend Earl of Southampton, but you are just imagine if you are using this to your boyfriend or your girlfriend. A boyfriend is using it to a girlfriend, or a girlfriend is using it to his to her boyfriend. You would, when instead of saying you look very beautiful today, you look very bright and beautiful today, when you use the term shall I compare thee to a summer's day, it makes a simple, familiar, ordinary sentence turns it into a very extraordinary statement, where the same thing is you perceive it in a very different light. Because when I say you look, or when somebody says you look very bright and sunny today, you take it, okay, you are happy about the compliment that you got, but again, that does not have the impact that the sonnet, the words in the sonnet gives. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? It makes you perceive things in a different light. It makes strange the familiar setting. Okay, I will give you one more example. And that's from Tolstoy's work. I shall quote from one of his work. To strip people who have broken the law, to hurl them to the floor, and to rap on their bottoms with switches. I'll repeat. To strip people who have broken the law, to hurl them to the floor, to rap on their bottoms with switches. According to Slowsky, this language is literary because by spelling out in such gruesome detail what the act of flogging actually involves, it makes strange the action and help us perceive it with vividness that is otherwise, familiar. Okay, it helps us to perceive it with a vividness which is strange. All right, it makes a familiar word, flogging, the act of flogging, physical punishment or physical torture, which is flogging, is made very much strange, and it enables us to perceive it with vividness, that strangeness. Okay, so we are able to perceive it. If it was the word flogging was used, perhaps we would not be able to understand this gruesome act of physical punishment in such detail. Okay, so here what Tolstoy does is he makes a familiar word or a familiar act of flogging, physical punishment, unfamiliar or defamiliarized, so that the readers will be able to perceive it in a different light, or the readers will be able to perceive it much better than the usual words that they are habituated with or accustomed to, that is flogged heavily or severe punishment. Such words which are very familiar to them, which are accustomed or which are habituated, is actually dulled. Their perception is dulled, and therefore they will not be able to perceive it. Whereas when he uses such strange words, look at that dialogue once more. To strip people who have broken the law, to hurl them to the floor and to rap onto their bottoms with switches. That shows the gruesome act of flogging or physical punishment. But the words that are used are in a very strange, or he has structured the language in a strange manner that makes us perceive it in a different light. Clear? Okay. Now next is Slowsky applied this theory of defamiliarization to the domain of literature or literary criticism by suggesting a distinction between fabula and stuzet. Now, fabula and stuzet we will not discuss in this class. He has used this act of defamiliarization to give a distinction between fabula and stuzet. But fabula and stuzet we shall discuss in the next video. So I hope you understood, and if you didn't, please let me know. WhatsApp me personally and let me know. I shall try to explain it further. Thank you and keep safe.